Another case we are going to tell you about today happened in Argentina. Let's find out the details of this story. Angelica Suarez was born in 1996 in the province of Misiones, Argentina. She grew up in a modest home along with 11 siblings, among whom she was one of the youngest. Her parents, Marcelina and Teresa, who preferred the peace and quiet of the countryside, chose to live in the countryside near the small town of Soberbio, with a population of about 5,000 on the border between Argentina and Brazil. The Suarez family home was about 15 kilometers from the town center. The couple farmed the land and raised animals. Angelica's favorite occupation was boxing. She took her training very seriously and devoted a lot of time to it. Her mother claimed that Angelica was an excellent daughter, a caring sister, and a good-natured person who was very much loved by others. In her youth, the girl fell in love with a young man who was 5 years older than her. At the age of 17, she left her father's house and moved in with 22-year-old Juan Oscar Baumgarten. Juan Oscar attended school for only 4 years, receiving an elementary education, and as an adult, he devoted himself to working as a mason. This forced him to travel frequently to the provincial capital of Posadas, located 240 kilometers from the neighborhood of Itati, where the young family rented a small house. It was the year 2013, and all was well in the couple's life. A year and a half later, in January 2015, they had a daughter, Sabrina. Soon the situation in the family began to heat up. Angelica and Juan began to quarrel often, and did it quite loudly, without embarrassing anyone. Neighbors often heard the noise and screams coming from their house. At that time, Angelica's brother, Jose Suarez, began living with his girlfriend. The couple repeatedly witnessed Juan Oscar's inappropriate behavior towards his partner. Jose told Teresa, his mother, that his son-in-law is not at all like what they take him for, that he is very jealous and aggressive. Angelica, unable to withstand the pressure from Juan, finally shut down and, without trying to resist, submissively endured the abuse. In August, a tragedy occurred in the Suarez family, which greatly affected the young woman. Relatives noticed that Angelica was deeply worried, often crying and sad, but since this had not happened to her before, they decided that it was because of her brother, who had been in a traffic accident. The relatives did not realize that their son-in-law Juan, a tyrant and despot, allowed himself too much and could attack Angelica with fists even without reason. In March of the new year, neighbors again heard a loud quarrel, but, as usual, did not interfere and did not contact the authorities. Since then, however, something changed in Angelica's mind, and she finally decided to break the silence. The woman filed a complaint of gender-based violence by her roommate. At the time, she was 20 years old, and he was 25. Juan got a restraining order, but since he was always strong in the art of manipulation, he managed to convince Angelica that he needed to return home. He said that it was impossible to traumatize little Sabrina, as it was important for the girl's proper development to have her father around. There are reports that the man soon attacked the young woman again, and she filed another report of violence. This was in June of 2016. Although they lived under the same roof, Angelica ended all relations with him and began dating her boxing coach, Walter Saper, who was 37 years old. They shared a common passion for boxing and saw each other daily at training sessions. The man was single, but he also had a young daughter living with him. These happy coincidences encouraged the couple and they decided to move to Argentine Patagonia, and there they began to live and work together. Angelica's family was aware of the fact that her relationship with Juan Oscar was not going through the best of times, and we can even say that it was already over. Later, those close to her admitted that they knew that the woman was dating Walter. On Monday, June 13, 2016, Joshua, Angelica's brother, went to her house after work and noticed that she was not there. This struck him as a little odd. Joshua waited, but his sister never returned, although she was a very devoted mother and could not leave her daughter for long. On Tuesday, June 14, Juan Oscar went to the police and reported that Angelica had left home with a suitcase full of clothes. He did not go into details, only adding that the suitcase belonged to him and that he used it when traveling for work. Joshua had not heard from his sister for 2 days, so he decided to tell his parents. However, his brother-in-law insisted that there was no need to do so, because Angelica would be here soon. A worried Joshua continued to say that something was wrong, and then Juan offered him a motorcycle in exchange for his silence. Still, the woman's disappearance was reported to the police and loved ones. Relatives called friends of acquaintances, searched the nearby neighborhood, but found nothing suspicious. However, everyone who knew Angelica agreed that this behavior of the woman was very strange. She left her young daughter in the care of her partner and disappeared without telling anyone. Almost a month had passed, and there had been no news from her. On the 6th of July, 2 17-year-old boys were fishing in a tributary of the Uruguay River, which flows through a large area near the Brazilian border, at about 11 o'clock in the morning. According to their testimony, the two were aboard a canoe when the hook of one of them's fishing rod caught on something. The boys swam closer and saw an object through the clear water. Looking closer, they realized that there was a suitcase lying on the bottom, with a leg and a head sticking out of it. The terrified boys immediately reported the scary find to the authorities. Police investigators immediately arrived at the said location, lifted the body from the river bottom, and transported it to the forensic morgue in Posadas for necessary investigations. The first thing they wanted to know was the identity of the victim and the cause and time of her death. Despite the high degree of decomposition of the body, at the autopsy, the experts were able to establish what the unfortunate woman died of, namely, mechanical compression asphyxia. The woman's neck was tightly tied with a scarf that partially covered her mouth. In addition, experts were able to determine that she was already dead when she was thrown into the water. The experts could not say anything about the details of her injuries. The scarf proved to be an important element in identifying the victim because it belonged to Angelica Suarez, and those who saw her shortly before her disappearance remembered that she was wearing it. It was possible to establish that the murder took place between the 11th and 13th of June 2016. This date coincided with the date of the report that Juan had written to the police about his cohabitant leaving the house. Angelica's family was summoned to identify the corpse. After that, no one had any more doubts. The case of Angelica's disappearance turned into a murder case. Juan was arrested a few hours after the discovery of the corpse. Angelica's relatives and neighbors considered him the main suspect from the day the woman stopped contacting him, but also behind bars was Walter, a boxing coach with whom his ward was having an affair. Juan tried to frame Walter, claiming he was one of the last people to see Angelica alive. The police obtained permission to search Juan's home. A trained dog was brought into the case and found traces of blood. The evidence was crucial to the investigation. 4 more searches were conducted at relatives' homes, during which detectives seized items of clothing, cell phones, and diaries. They were trying to determine what Angelica was doing and who she was communicating with on social media and cell phones before she disappeared. The first version of the investigation was that Juan took his partner's life in a fit of jealousy after learning that she had entered a new relationship and was about to move to another city. According to the second version, Walter demanded that Angelica start living with him, but she did not agree, for which she was killed. And yet the behavior of the coach was not like the behavior of the perpetrator of the crime. He tried his best to find out anything about Angelica, supported her family, and helped in the search. From the very beginning of the investigation, Walter took a firm stand and defended himself, claiming his innocence. He constantly cooperated with the authorities and even provided facts that proved his non-involvement in the murder. In addition, the man was the first to inform Angelica's mother about the discovery of the body. He then left his phone numbers to the police so they could conduct all the necessary forensic tests, gave them the passwords to his social media accounts, and handed over surveillance videos from the stores he stopped by on those days, and even from the transportation terminal, so investigators could check all his movements. Walter's attempts to prove that he had nothing to do with the crime and that he was really worried about Angelique when she disappeared had the desired result. On September 14, 2016, about 2.5 months after the body was discovered. Prior to that, the athlete had been suspended, but since all the evidence gathered pointed to Juan Oscar as the prime suspect, Walter's attorney secured her client's reinstatement a few months later. She proved that the coach was only connected to the case to get the murder solved or ruled out. Given that not only her relatives but also Juan knew about Walter's connection to Angelica, all eyes focused on him. That's how the investigative process began. The first thing that caught the eye of the detectives was the restriction ordering the man not to live in the same house with Angelica, and the restraining order issued to him due to complaints of violence. But Juan did not comply with the authorities' demands. His explosive temper and desire to control everything prevented him from doing so. As the investigation began, detectives attempted to reconstruct his behavior in the days after Angelica disappeared, and that's when a key witness came forward. Miguel Angel Pereira, a 22-year-old cab driver, claimed that on June 13th he had done a favor for Juan, who got into his car. The passenger was carrying a heavy suitcase and asked him to drive him to a location fairly close to the river where the body was later found. During oral arguments at the preliminary familiarization stage of the case, it was revealed that the testimonies of Miguel Angel and Juan Oscar were radically opposite. However, one of the testimonies was found to be completely consistent with the evidence and proofs gathered during the investigation of the case. When the suspect was asked to describe the route of the cab he took the route through the interior streets of the neighborhood, with its terminus at the corner of a house because the vehicle could not climb the slope strewn with loose rocks. Miguel Angel, however, claimed that he drove straight down the main alley until he reached the block where he dropped Juan Oscar off in front of the house. The most important contradiction was as follows. The suspect said that was the end of the trip, but the driver denied saying that. He said the passenger had asked him to drive as close to the yard as possible, explaining that he had been away and now needed to load tools he intended to take to the woodworking shop. But the terrain was high and the car could not get close. Miguel Angel alleged that the defendant came out of the house with a large suitcase, put it in the trunk, and together they went to the bridge where Juan stopped the driver, paid the toll, and pulled the suitcase out with difficulty. He then carried the heavy load down the path and was soon out of sight. 3 weeks later, the victim's body was found in a tributary of the river. On March 6, 2018, a step-by-step reconstruction of the movements of Juan Oscar and Miguel Angel on the day of the alleged murder was made. Before that, Juan, who had been behind bars for almost 2 years, was escorted out of prison by police officers. The man was depressed and passive, answering all questions asked by investigators, experts, and even the judge. There was always a police officer next to him, who was extremely attentive when the suspect's handcuffs were removed. The team went to the place where Juan lived before his arrest. His return to his home neighborhood meant nothing to anyone. Even his mother Maria chose not to see her son. The place where the investigation took place was near her home, but she did not come out or even look out of the window to see her son, who repeatedly looked for her. When Maria was interviewed about this attitude, she did not give an explanation for her indifference, but simply said that she knew her son was innocent because she had brought him up very well. Miguel Angel's testimony was crucial because he not only provided accurate information about the transportation of the suspect and the cargo, but was also able to identify the suitcase. The guy explained that the trunk of the car was broken and he had to support it while Juan pulled out the suitcase, which was apparently very, very heavy. It was at this time that Miguel examined it to the smallest detail. Through this testimony, it became very clear that the suspect was carrying a large suitcase, and there was a possible connection to the crime. With all this evidence, proof, and material obtained, Juan Oscar was charged with aggravated murder. The latter determination was due to a history of domestic violence, and because the man continued to be in a home in which he was prohibited from residing. The trial was set for October 2019. Several months before the trial began, Angelica's former partner went on a hunger strike in prison. His goal was to get a speedy trial under an agreement with the prosecutor's office, in which he would plead guilty in exchange for a lighter sentence. But the prosecutor's office found such an exchange unacceptable because Juan was facing a life sentence due to the large amount of evidence and would have to plead guilty. His hunger strike was called unheard of impertinence. Even more outrageous was his voiced desire to plead guilty in exchange for a 7-year prison sentence. Because the court did not agree with Juan, he never pleaded guilty, and the case was sent to criminal court. An even longer trial was begun, during which the parties presented their arguments to the jury. A total of 11 witnesses testified, including a neighbor who claimed that she had never seen Juan beat his cohabitant, but the testimony of another neighbor, Erica, who was also Angelica's boxing partner, detailed that she complained to her when Juan cut her with a knife. Angelica admitted to Erica that their relationship was very strained. They often quarreled, and she endured beatings. A friend of the deceased stated that Angelica and Juan had an argument in the days before her disappearance because he blamed her for an affair she allegedly had with Walter, and she responded that she was no longer going to answer to him for her actions. All 3 witnesses said the couple was no longer in a relationship, each was on their own, but they lived together because of their young daughter, to whom they were both parents. Angelica's family also testified. The woman's mother, Teresa, said she initially believed her son-in-law was innocent and visited him at the police station, but he wouldn't even look at her when she tried to talk to him. Teresa later recalled that a few days before the murder, over dinner, Juan had said over and over again that Angelica would not live with anyone but him. To Marcelina, the father of the deceased claimed that his daughter could not have left of her own free will, and recalled that during a visit to his son-in-law, the latter had cried, assuring him that he was innocent and saying that the real culprit was the boxing teacher. Now, however, Marcelina no longer believes a word he says. During his appearance at the trial, Juan denied the charges against him and refuted all the testimony of the cab driver, which was some of the most valuable evidence against him. He insisted that he had bought a suitcase at the supermarket quite different from the one mentioned, and that he had made only one trip. At the trial, he tried to make himself look like a victim, claiming that he did not understand why the cab driver Miguel was telling untruths. Juan admitted that his relationship with Angelica had deteriorated, but according to him, the reason was not jealousy. He also stated that there may have been more than just a professional relationship between his cohabitant and Walter. Angelica often left unannounced, and if he was jealous, he would not have allowed her to attend training. Regarding the complaint that had gotten Juan evicted from the house, he replied that Angelica had hurt her own arm and had unfairly blamed him. He was then asked what he would say about the restraining order, under which he had no right to live with Angelica, and which he had flagrantly violated. Juan replied that no one had not notified him to leave the house, although he admitted that a police officer had handed him a paper saying so, but he said he had not read it. Of that ill-fated day, the 13th of June, the man narrated as follows. He had worked in the morning, and at noon he came home, had lunch with Angelica, and went to take a nap. When he awoke, the woman was not in the house. She could have gone somewhere and come back, so Juan waited for her for a while and then took his daughter to her mother. After that, he went to the supermarket. The last witnesses were Ramirez and Willis, the boys who came across the corpse in the river on July 6, 2016. They gave the court a detailed account of their discovery. From the indictment filed by the prosecutor and read in court, it was concluded that the crime was committed on the afternoon of June 13th. The forensic evidence established that the victim's cell phone last worked at 11 o'clock 17 minutes that day, at the home of Angelica and Juan. It is believed that the defendant strangled the woman that afternoon, and when she no longer showed signs of life, immediately placed the corpse in a suitcase. This would otherwise have been impossible because of rigor mortis. Then he took a nap next to his daughter Sabrina, and in fact, the autopsy determined that there was undigested food in Angelica's stomach, indicating that the woman had been killed just after lunch. After waking up, Juan got up, took his daughter to her mother, and went to work. In the afternoon, he shopped at the supermarket and ordered a cab. Miguel Angel arrived at the call. In front of the house, Juan asked the driver to pull into the garage, but the car was very low, and he could not do it. Then the man with great difficulty carried a suitcase out of the garage, placed it in the trunk of the car, and asked to make another trip to transfer some tools to a carpentry shop near the bridge. There, Juan took the suitcase out of the trunk and walked down the path to the river, where Angelica's corpse was later found. Thus, it was established that the purchases in the store were an excuse to drive with them to the house itself and then take out a heavy suitcase. Other evidence was presented in court, including a cell phone forensic examination report and the results of an autopsy performed by a forensic medical examiner. All studies confirmed that the perpetrator was of sound mind and remained cold-blooded when he planned and committed the murder. On the 4th of October, 1919, the final verdict was handed down. The Criminal Court of First Instance sentenced Juan Oscar Baumgarten to life imprisonment for the aggravated murder of Angelica Suarez, the mother of his daughter. The man must serve at least 35 years behind bars before he is eligible for parole. In April 2021, Juan's defense filed a tangential appeal, that is, demanded a review and reversal of the verdict, arguing that the court did not specify the day, time, and circumstances in which the murder of the woman was committed. Juan's genetic material was not collected, and no aggravating circumstances should have been applied to him, since he and Angelica were no longer in a relationship. But the highest court of justice, which is the name of the highest judicial body in the country, rejected this claim and upheld the judgment handed down by the criminal court in 2019. While Juan is serving his sentence, the relatives of little Sabrina are fighting for custody of the child. Before the trial, the girl was in the care of Maria, her paternal grandmother, since Juan transferred her parental rights. However, Angelica's parents filed a custody suit in court. Maria insisted that her granddaughter should stay with her forever, because she lived next door and took care of her for so long that Sabrina allegedly recognized her as her own mother. Besides, the grandmother always gets sad when the girl is not around. But Angelica, according to her mother-in-law, could not be called a good mother. The second grandmother, Teresa, noted that only she could fully meet the material and emotional needs of the child. One cannot overlook the fact that the granddaughter grew up in the family of a criminal, and this can have a devastating effect on her psyche in the future. Unfortunately, we do not know the court's decision on the girl's case.